doing? You having a good time at COSI today? Yeah, let's make some noise. Oh, fantastic. They got ice cream?
You got ice cream.
You guys got ice cream. We were told we're not allowed to have ice cream unless we do a good job.
Yeah, we get ice cream.
Then we get ice cream, that's great. I'm Dr. Josh Montgomery. I'm a computer science professor and droid builder. And with me today, here at COSI, we have Mr. Don Bies. Now, if you don't know who Don is, Don worked on a multitude of movies, including Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, Ghostbusters 2, Galaxy Quest, Pirates of the Caribbean, and a little small movie called Star Wars, Episode 2 and 3. Works for Lucasfilms for a considerable amount of time. Give him a round of applause, everybody. Don Bies is in the house.
Thank you.
Now, Don's known mostly for his work with R2-D2, puppeteering, that kind of work. We're going to look at some of his work in Episode 2 and 3. But as you can probably imagine, this talk's going to be focused around some of his work in R2-D2. And like many things, we're going to start at the beginning and kind of work our way through this talk. So we're going to start here. Don, if you could talk a little bit about our next picture here. What is this?
So this is actually the very first picture that was ever drawn for Star Wars. George Lucas hired an artist named Ralph McQuarrie, and he was the conceptual artist for the original Star Wars film. And so this is the very first image that he put out. And you can see the early influence of C-3PO and R2-D2. Now R2 used to, George's concept of R2 at the time was that he would flip the leg forward, set it down, drag the legs back, and then flip forward, and that's how R2 would move. He wouldn't roll. And when they got to do it for real, they realized that that was going to be too hard to do. Right. But C-3PO was inspired by, there was a famous silent film called Metropolis in the mid-1920s. And there was a female robot called Maria, I believe it was.
Okay.
And this is the design influence. So this is the male counterpart to Maria.
Fantastic. So when George saw these images, he kind of fit them into the story. Is that how that happened?
No, he would have given Ralph the idea. So the idea that the two droids were always comic relief, and in George's mind is that R2 and 3PO told the entire story of Star Wars.
Gotcha.
So when George pictured originally 12 films that he was going to make someday, they were all told from the perspective of the robots. The other thing was that George is heavily influenced by Japanese cinema and Akira Kurosawa, who's a famous Japanese director. And Kurosawa did a film called The Hidden Fortress.
Okay.
And in The Hidden Fortress, it's almost essentially the story of Star Wars, where they rescue a princess and they have to do a big battle and everything. And there's two peasants that are the comic relief for the movie.
Gotcha.
And the peasants were turned into R2-D2 and C-3PO. And at one point, R2 actually even talked.
Okay.
But then George thought it would be cuter to have R2 doing the beeps and whistles. So it was a bit of a evolution of the characters. George tried to do like an Abbott Costello, tall, thin one, a short, squat, character, and so he commissioned Ralph McQuarrie to do these. I think he did a series of about 12 paintings.
Okay. And
George would use these because the story was so kind of outrageous and insane that nobody quite understood what George wanted to do. So he was using these pictures, these paintings, to sell the story to the different film executives.
Right.
So
fantastic. Oh, who do we have here?
Okay, so the guy is actually a talented film editor. He also directed a movie called Return to Oz, and he was a sound designer, and his name is Walter Murch. But this is showing the actual, this is the evolution of R2-D2's name. So in film, even to this day, the image and the sound are recorded separately. So if you're on a movie set, they would say roll camera, roll sound, and then they do the clapperboard, and the clapperboard is to sync the two sounds later on in post-production. Originally, now with digital film, it's a little different, the post-production process, but the concept is still the same. But originally, they would have the film would be on one reel of film, and the dialogue would be on another reel of film. and they would run them through together on the editing bed.
Gotcha.
And sync them up.
Yeah.
And film projectors back then, or actually the film's cameras can only shoot 10 minutes of film at a time.
Right.
So they would have it in reels, and movies were done in reels. And so most of the young kids here would never remember this, but you older folks will remember seeing the little blip in the corner of the screen when you're at a cinema.
Yeah.
And that was to tell the projectionist to switch over to the next reel of film. So you'd usually, those would be about every 10 minutes or so. Anyway, when they're editing the film, they have them in those specific reels. And so they would number them. There would be reel 1, dialogue 1, reel 2, dialogue 2, and so forth and so on. So when they were doing American Graffiti, George and Walter were editing American Graffiti, which is the film preceding Star Wars, and either Walter or George said, hand me R2-D2, standing for a reel 2, dialogue 2, and George thought, hey, that's a clever name. So
and that's just where it came from.
And that's where R2-D2's name
Reel
came
2, dialogue 2. Now you know where R2-D2's name come from.
In Italy, when I was in Italy shooting episode 2, everyone would look at R2 and say, Ciono Piotto.
Okay.
And Ciono Piotto is C1P8. And that's in Italy. R2 is Ciono Piotto.
Ah.
So
we're here to teach you stuff in COSI today, so now you know something, right? Nate, you now know where R2-D2's names come from. It's a good thing to know. All right, what do we got here next? Oh, let's talk a little bit about what we have here.
Yeah, so these were evolutionary drawings of R2-D2, again by various artists. R2 was always kind of like the Swiss Army knife. You know, he had some tool for every device. He's supposed to be an astromech, which fixes spaceships.
Right, right.
And as he did many times in the film, he saved the characters so many times. So these are just different concepts of developing R2. The most interesting one is the lower right-hand corner. That one that just looks like a tube on a ball. That was eventually inspired BB-8 many years later. So one concept of R2 was just rolling along on the ball. Again, at the time they're like, nah, we can't do that. Too expensive, too much development. We couldn't do that. So, but they eventually were able to do it for Force Awakens.
It looks like the top left, these two images that we have up here, the very top of Chopper looks very similar to that too.
Yeah. Again, they never threw out designs.
Yeah, you just keep this wonderful stuff, right?
I mean, the name of Utapau, which is in episode 2, I think it is,
okay.
Or episode 3, is actually in the original draft of the script for Star Wars. So there was a planet called Utapau. So George never really threw out ideas. He would recycle them, come use them like many years later. Or once he stopped making the films, the filmmakers would throw some sort of homage to those, and that's definitely a precursor to
Chopper. You can see the
Chopper.
very top of Chopper and get that right from those images. It's great.
And so, in the evolution, then they started being more realistic as to what they could do, what was really possible. And so these are actually the working drawings. On the right is the actual blueprint for R2. The majority of R2 was created by hand. Everything was made from scratch. There was one found object on R2, and that's the little hologram eye, that he projects Princess Leia's out on. You can see the R2s here all have 3 of them on their heads, and that's a reading lamp from an old airplane from the 1950s. So if you're in an airplane,
so everything else was custom made.
Everything else was custom made.
How many were built?
That's up for debate, but I think, based on research and people I've talked to, there were about 6 made for the original.
About 6 made for the original Star Wars. And it looks like there's an image of a guy in here too.
Yeah. So again, in the technology of creating R2 for a film, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You would think, well, now with robotics and electronics and everything, it would be really easy just to make a robot like you see here, like the amazing ones that are here, but. At the time, particularly radio control was kind of in its infancy, and they had so many troubles with it. So to impart some sort of more character and everything, the easiest thing to do is put somebody in it and wiggle around in it. So
there we go.
We have some photos of
We'll
Teddy.
look at that in a second, right? That's great.
So yeah, so this is the continuing evolution. So on the left is George with an early wooden prototype with a metal head that again was just to get the scale and try to figure out shapes and this sort of thing. And on the right is the aluminum built R2s, and these were built by a company in England. Star Wars, the original Star Wars, were shot in England.
Yeah.
And so this was built by a company in England that actually had done aerospace engineering. So R2 was built by several aerospace engineers.
Oh, aerospace engineers developing R2-D2.
But it's all aluminum.
It's all aluminum. At any point in time in the movies, would we ever have a wood version?
No, there was never a wood version. Yeah, that was just a prototype to work out stuff. Again, depending on how they were going to make it, they might have done a wood pattern. They did the original patterns in wood and would have molded it. I also spoke to, on episode 1, when I was working on episode 1 in England, I spoke to one of the plasterers, and in England it was very common to have these guys that would create patterns out of plaster.
Yeah.
So a lot of sets you would see in England, even to this day, the ornate shapes and everything, they've actually done that out of plaster because it's an art that they kind of continue keeping. Unfortunately, it's dying a bit, but this guy walked by, he says, "Oh yeah, I made that originally," and he made the head out of plaster.
He's plastered the whole thing.
Yeah, it was all, yeah, there's a technique called a sweep where they use a silhouette of a piece of metal, put plaster down, sweep it around, and then refine that shape. So
it's fascinating. You can see a little bit of change between R2's concept and then actually get to aluminum, and some of those just looks a little bit different, right?
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, it was just an evolution. They were trying different things. There's proportion differences also. It looks like the arms and the feet are pretty much the same as the R2s that we know, but the body is changed a little bit. And again, a lot of it, might have been driven by just like, oh, this is what we can do right now.
Right.
That's a very common thing with film, particularly Star Wars was considered a bit of a low-budget film.
Oh yeah.
And so they didn't have much time and effort. The reason there's that whole used universe in Star Wars is because they didn't have money, or so they went to junkyards and bought stuff and then made it out of it. I don't know how many of you know that Luke's lightsaber from Star Wars is actually an old flash handle from an old camera.
Yeah.
So the flash handle, the thing that actually Luke holds, or it's actually technically Anakin's lightsaber, is the battery holder, and then there would be a big reflector on the end of it with the light bulb in it.
Yeah.
And you just press a button, and when you see one, a real one, it was a real one, but if you see one as it was originally intended to use, they didn't do very much other than put the little strips on it. So it was a great cost savings device to be able to use, junk essentially.
Right. At that time, it's whatever part you could find to make something happen, right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And they would try to take, stuff and just mash it together and make something, look different. And, and they continue that even into the prequels, and in the current films they do take stuff. There's a famous story of the little communicator Qui-Gon Jinn uses in episode 1. It's actually a Schick's lady shaver for, so. And you look at it like, that looks like a lady shaver. That doesn't.
Zoom up on it now, you can see that kind of stuff, right? Hey audience, if you have questions for Don, we're going to have a Q&A at the very end. So as you're thinking about things, kind of keep that in your headspace, and we'll make sure we'll get you at the end of this talk, okay? So we'll get to that point here in just a little bit.
Yeah, so Kenny, this is Kenny Baker. Kenny was a little person in London. He actually has quite a huge film resume. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he was inside R2. So again, it was just easier to get somebody in there and wiggle around and do it. So a lot of the original film featured Kenny in the suit, and he had imparted a lot of character. He imparted a lot of the character, what R2D2 became. When you'd see it in rolling, that would be a remote control. But even again on the original film, the remote control didn't work that well. George was just convinced that R2 never worked, So, and probably on the original film, it didn't work a whole lot. So there's scenes where they were pulling it on cables and just dragging.
So if it was ever 3 wheels, Kenny wasn't in it?
Kenny was not in it.
Okay,
It's
so
only
when he was
pretty much only the 2 legs.
2 wheel. You can kind of see a little bit of that, can't you? Can you like right there at the legs?
Yeah, well, because in that black and white photo on the bottom there, yeah, he's got his legs, his feet into the foot, and then the feet are covered with like a dryer hose, actually.
Yeah.
You know what it is. So.
You can look for it. You'll see it now.
Yeah, you see it in the film.
You'll
yeah.
never be able to not see that now in episode 4. You're welcome.
These are some tests. You could just run these, and these are tests again. Early R2 stuff, trying different things out.
So is this why George came to the opinion R2 never worked? Is it from these videos? That's a piece here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Watch what happens here. Unfortunately for poor Kenny. So that's Kenny in there. He's trying to walk. He's trying to give it some movement, and
also, I'm going to go forward. Can you make it go forward? A little bit.
Yeah, it's hard because it's slipping on the floor, you know. The other thing was a lot of different surfaces that the droids would operate on. They never really thought about it. So like sand and dirt, and tiled floors that have lots of grooves in them. Robots get stuck in that. They don't like that.
Yeah, they don't like the sandy stuff like that, for sure.
Whoa.
Oh no! Ah! Oh, you could literally see Kenny in there too.
And that had to hurt.
That was not good.
But these are just some other various robots and behind the scenes testing.
Okay.
So.
Right.
And so the one thing I talk about a lot is that while there is R2 is R2, the shape and everything of R2 and the character and the rolling around and Kenny being in there is amazing, creates this character. But 90%, in my opinion, 90% of R2 is his voice. And that's all due to the guy in these pictures is Ben Burtt. Ben also created all the sound effects and all the different voices and alien languages and everything for the original Star Wars up until through the prequels.
Yeah.
And Ben is a wonderful, amazing, talented guy. And he created the concept of a sound designer that is currently in existence today. I think the next one is a clip of him talking about our
Okay, we'll have him talk here in a sec. I heard George Lucas say in a conference one time I was at that he felt the secret sauce of Star Wars was the music and the sound. Like that was it.
He always said that 50% of the film cinematic experience is sound, and so one of the things that again happened in movie theaters, particularly in the 70s and 80s, was movie theaters did their projection, their bulbs were dimmer, the theaters themselves were just not that welcoming. Again, those older crowd here would remember going to a movie and your feet sticking to the floor. Maybe they still do now. But anyway, so in the 90s, he developed the THX sound system, which is George did.
Yeah.
And he hired a guy named Tom Homlinson. And they joked that it was Tom Homlinson's experiment, THX.
Okay.
But THX was actually a nod to George's very first film called THX 1138. And so they would create this sound experience for movie theaters, and you could get THX certified. And now, even to this day, there's a home THX system, so you can buy home-approved THX sound systems for your home theater. So.
Okay. Let's hear Ben say something. We got Ben queued up here.
At one point, we talked about R2's personality, and we felt he was developing kind of as a toddler. He was sort of almost a baby. He could communicate, but he would make sounds which gave the emotional content of what he wanted to get across. Eventually, we found that we were making the sounds ourselves. We were kind of George would beep and boop, and I might beep and boop back. So a few experiments led to the combination of using my voice doing baby talk, beeps and boops, with the electronic synthesizer. So R2 is sort of 50% machine and 50% organic.
It's interesting. The
other little note, Ben is also the voice of Wall-E.
The voice of Wall-E. If you guys haven't seen Wall-E, he's over here on the side. He's not yelling yet, but I bet he'll be out here in a second. Fantastic. Right. Next piece here.
Oh, so these are called just little cheats. Now, the R2 in the original Star Wars couldn't turn its head and drive at the same time. So this is a shot from the film, but if you look carefully, there's actually Kenny Baker's hiding behind the R2 and he's turning the head. You can see his feet moving around. This is blown up and enhanced so you can see it. This is called a Texas switch in film. So R2 just went past you here, and then he rolls in here. But it's actually two different R2s. So there's R2 there, and he's going straight. He couldn't turn, so they had an R2 ready, standing, going the other way. So he goes there. They call that the Texas switch in movies.
This is movie magic right here, right? We bring one in, we have the other one move back out.
Yeah, so you can see the two R2s there. So that's that same shot scene being shot. And then this is one that a lot of people don't realize. R2's going down a pair of stairs over there, and he comes toddling in here, which is actually Kenny Baker walking in with the suit. So there's a guy R2's hanging on wires there going down. And then you'll see R2 just at the bottom of the frame starts popping into the
You're going to see something you can never unsee here in a second.
But yeah, so that's R2 coming down the stairs. There were cables holding him up, and he was being puppeteered. But there's Kenny with his little feet. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, there you go. So they didn't even put his feet on. They just let him walk.
Movie magic being ruined right now. We're so sorry.
Yeah, at least he had colored coordinated blue socks.
He's got blue socks on. We're so sorry. Oh, talk about this robot time.
So I saw Star Wars when it first came out in 1977, and so I had to build my own. So this is my R2 that I built. I was one of the original R2 builders.
Wow.
Before there were R2 builders, I guess. I'm sure there were lots of them all over the world, but I built one, and so this is the evolution of my R2. So 1978 I built this and had to learn. That's where I learned how to do the different things.
Did you have any measurements to go off of, or was it just you just looked at the images and went from there?
There was a lot of images, again, pre-internet. So I got magazines mainly, but the biggest thing I had was MPC was a model kit company, and they had an R2D2 model kit. So I took all my measurements off the model kit, and what I had to determine was how wide it was. That was my first most critical dimension.
Okay.
So I determined that it was probably roughly about 18 inches wide. So what's wide enough? Where can I get that dome?
Yeah.
And that was the hardest thing. I figured I could make everything else. The arms were wood. The body was two pieces of wood with a piece of plastic wrapped around it. I could figure all that out, but what was I going to do with that dome? So I found that at my high school, they had the dome garbage can covers.
Okay.
And I'm looking at that, and I got the tape measure out, and it's like, yeah, that's 18 inches in diameter. It's perfect. How do I get that? So I fortunately had a friend that was a bit of a juvenile delinquent, and I offered him a ride home. I could drive, he couldn't. I'd offered him a ride home if he would somehow get one of those for me. And I think they can't prosecute me anymore. Statute of limitations. I think it's long gone. So, but that's how I got my R2 dome, and that's stolen from my high school in Chicago.
Thank you for that delinquent, what they have given us. That is great. I'm curious, anything that you learned from this process made it into the movies?
Again, it's just the thirst for knowledge, really.
Sure.
It was a reverse engineering, and that's what I brought to my career ultimately was like, okay, I got to make this, and then we back off from there. It's like, okay, I could do this way, I could do this way. So you reverse engineer it, and that was the biggest lesson that I learned that eventually I continue to do.
So how long total did it take you to build this?
Oh, I never stopped building it. It was like the Winchester Mystery R2.
All the droid builders can attest to this.
I never stopped building it. The first two pictures are my first incarnation. That's the second incarnation. So I was constantly redesigning, rebuilding. My father helped me get a piece of aluminum turned, rolled, and so I kept on just redoing it to the point where life got in the way and I stopped working on it eventually. So.
Gotcha. That's fantastic.
I'm not sure what. This.
嫉妬めあったその力何ここからドキドキ感じ方かな一括変換 また声しちゃってこの順調ね。バーコード入力もできるパナソニックワープロ U1 プロ
Panasonic SMO something new.
So that was my first job with Lucasfilm. Oh, there we go.
We can truly experience the universe.
今私たちは宇宙を実感できる世界を実感できる衛星放送のために BS チューナー内蔵ドームスピーカー搭載パナカラー X
Panasonic SMO something new.
We could stop. So these were a series of Japanese commercials in 1987. George Lucas and the Star Wars characters were hired to be the spokesman for Panasonic.
Okay.
Matsushita of Japan.
Yeah.
And so these only aired overseas in Japan. And we shot over 6 years. We shot a whole series of different commercials.
Okay.
Off and on. And that was my first day on set was with George Lucas, Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO, Peter May, who played Chewbacca, and me as R2-D2. So
That was the first time, right there.
yeah, that
was
first
the
commercial you saw
yeah.
was the first thing I ever did operating R2-D2.
Makes me think, high point of your career. What's the high point? Was that it?
Well, that certainly was one of them.
Yeah.
There was a lot of them over the years, for different reasons. My most favorite experience was on Attack of the Clones, just because being on location shooting and then going on to Italy and Tunisia and London
Yeah.
and everything for shooting, that was a lot of fun.
I bet it was, but that was great. I think we got another video here, right?
Yeah, this is go to the next one, I think. Oh. I'm not sure what this one
Here,
is.
maybe one more. There we go.
Oh yeah, this is another commercial we did. This aired here.
I remember this commercial. Yes, I see some head nods. Other people remember this commercial? Yeah, you remember this commercial? Okay. I don't think so.
Nothing outlasts the Energizer battery. It keeps going and going.
So that was, and this was I think 1995 or so, 94, and there was a series of campaigns that the Energizer was doing called Get the Bunny, and it was various famous movie villains, and Darth Vader appeared. So there was a cut in with real footage from the film, from Empire Strikes Back, cut in with a set that was recreated in Los Angeles. And I'm the one swiping the lightsaber across his head because the guy playing Darth Vader said, "I don't want to hit the bunny," and it's like, "I'll try it." So I swung it across it. I also made the lightsaber that unscrewed, and it's actually a mag light, a flashlight
Gotcha.
that I just modified, and I've got that at home.
Oh. Well, now I'm about to ask something. What other props do you have at home that are, coming from? Are you allowed to ask those? Statute of limitation issue again?
Yeah, no, that's actually the only one. They didn't want it back. I just took it back, so it wasn't for Lucasfilm, it was for Energizer. No, George kept very careful count of everything that we had, so there's all the R2s he still has them. So.
Okay. Just wondering if an R2-D2 is at your house somewhere.
No.
Oh, okay.
This was another commercial that we did for an NES Nintendo. The second stormtrooper through the door, that's me. And the one with the line.
The boy, where is he?
Now, was that your first talking role?
Yeah, actually it was, yeah. It was funny because the ad agency, there was a local, Lucasfilm is based near San Francisco, well now in San Francisco, and they were a San Francisco-based agency, and we shot that actually in Atlanta, Georgia, down the street from where Driving Miss Daisy was shot, and I went out there to coordinate the costumes and the characters and everything, and they put me in it. And it was kind of like a little childhood dream to be able to run while wearing a stormtrooper costume and burst through a door as it's exploding.
Yeah.
And so I got to do that. And then we knew that the one stormtrooper had the line. I said it on the day. And then they brought me into a studio and I had to record it over and over and over and
That
over.
whole too real thing
I'm
we're
still
talking
not
about,
sure
right?
if that's really my voice, but I did record it. I don't know if they used it.
It sounded like you. I
Yeah,
think it's
the
you.
boy, where
I
is
think
he?
So. Right. Oh, what we got here?
Yeah, so Grant Imahara, a lot of you know Grant possibly from Mythbusters. I met Grant when he worked at Skywalker Ranch, and his first job was at the THX home theater system, and his job was to test speakers for THX, and if you could pass the Grant test, those speakers were qualified to be a THX speaker, and so he blew up speakers for a living. That's why he got early training as a Mythbuster, and I met him. He had just started. He was an intern, and then he got a job there.
Yeah.
And I found out he was an electrical engineer, and I don't do electronics. Well, I do other kinds of wiring, and I do, prop making and everything, but I don't do electronics. So I found out he was an electrical engineer, and he knew how to do electronics. So I asked him, R2 needs some upgrades. Can you come in? So this is at the Lucasfilm archives. These pictures were probably taken about 1996, 97 or something like that.
So he's doing upgrades to R2
95.
from the archive.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
one of the original film R2s, and he's cleaning it up. So on episode 2, when we went in to do episode 2, we completely revamped all the R2s, and
Okay.
Grant redid all the electronics and cleaned everything up and programmed the controllers to work much better.
Right.
So.
Now Grant's unfortunately no longer with us. Can you tell us your favorite memory of Grant?
Well, we had so many. Grant also happened to be able to be the right size to play C-3PO.
Okay.
So in about 94, 95, something like that, there was what they called the Lucasfilm Summit, where they brought all the licensees out that were the licensees for Star Wars products to Lucasfilm to do this huge party and like brainstorming session.
Right.
And we needed a C-3PO for that, and they didn't want to fly Anthony Daniels out from London. So I looked at Grant and was like, I think you could fit in it. So we tried it out in the archives, and then he came in, and he did it that day. He and R2 introduced George Lucas to the licensees that day, and then from there on, he continued doing lots of C-3PO appearances.
Really?
Over the years. He was also, myself, and a guy named Nelson Hall were the 3 approved R2 operators for Lucasfilm. So one of the 3 of us would fly all over the world with R2-D2 and C-3PO.
Gotcha.
And then Grant is actually in episode 2 as C-3PO for some shots as well. So.
Being the right size matters, right?
That's right.
Fantastic.
Size does matter, yeah.
So when it comes to Grant, do you want to talk anything about the Grant Imahara Foundation?
After Grant passed away in 2020, his mom asked a few of us, close friends of his over the years, to help form a foundation to continue his inspiration to others. And Grant was a huge influence, a huge inspiration to a lot of people, young people, with his work on Mythbusters. And so we're continuing that to this day. And we help sponsor with the Ohio Coders a project, and we just did a huge STEAM education room at Star Wars Celebration.
Right. That was very well received.
Yeah.
The Grant Imahara STEAM Foundation supported that little challenge that we have on the table there. That's a little dome. So that little project there came from the work that Grant did here. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so looks like R2-D2's flying here.
Yeah. So now
I
we're
remember
moving.
that in episode 4.
We're moving into episode 1 now, into the prequel years here, and again, these are early concepts for episode 1 of making R2 be more. Do something different than we hadn't seen before, and there's this Swiss Army knife kind of concept. Again, very Chopper-esque, probably.
This looks just a lot.
Yeah.
This looks like I'm not sure if Tim O'Sullivan can build this or not, but Tim, May want to get on
Anybody
that,
up for that
May want to get on
challenge?
this.
You know, and again, a lot of this would have been, they go, oh, we'll just do a computer graphics. So we wouldn't have done it practically. But there was the flying concept that was for episode 1 originally.
Yeah.
And it did get used on episode 1, but you eventually see it on episode 2.
Yeah.
And that was a digital R2. So
Okay.
in the prequel films, there's only one digital shot of R2D2, a computer graphic shot, and that's when he saves the Queen's ship towards the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
When you see him pop up, drop his third leg, roll down, that was all digital. And then we did all the other stuff with real robots on a little set. It was actually me that bypassed the power coupler to increase, so that I saved the day for the Queen that day. So she owes me her life. But and then we had an R2 that actually deployed its third leg and rolled out of the shot, and that was a real R2.
Okay.
On episode 2, there were about 18 digital R2 shots, mainly them flying.
Yeah. Also, you
And-
didn't make it fly?
No.
okay.
They didn't give us that chance. They just said, "Oh, we'll do it." And then the third one, about half the shots were digital. So
Okay. That's great. All right, I think we have...
I'm not sure which. Oh, so for episode 1, I'll just walk through this. There's Grant and myself. We created a new R2 for episode 1, and again, it had a series of engineering challenges. And it had a steerable front wheel for various reasons. Too long to explain here, but that's what Grant's looking at to see if he can program the remote to be able to turn the front wheel in conjunction with the drive in the back. So this is our first day. This is actually pretty rare footage. This is our first day of actually taking the R2 out for a spin around. This is the ILM campus.
Oh.
And we were trying different surfaces and different things that, we were trying to break it essentially.
Yeah.
We came close a couple times, but for the most part it was working okay. And
Yeah. Oh, I thought I was going over.
and so we're just trying around, driving it, meeting some of the people, and also I was getting used to it because I was going to be driving it on set. I was getting used to the controls and trying to figure it out, how well it did slopes, uphill, downhill.
Now, did you break it today, or on that day?
We did not break it that day.
Okay.
No. And matter of fact, I don't think this one we ever broke. I broke other R2s, but not this one. This one was tougher, but it's also was slower. So we had going into episode 2, we had 12 R2s that we would use for various purposes. Well,
Okay.
some of them were just backup. No, this was to try to go over.
You're driving. I would never do this with my R2.
That's what it was designed to be able to do, is
Okay.
drive over grates and stuff. Fortunately, got stuck there, but we had backup R2s for R2s. We only had one of these, and this one actually even had, you can kind of see in the very bottom corner, we call it the skirt. There's a little black dot right there, and that's actually a camera, because the idea was that they were having problems in England of not being able to see R2. You need to see R2 to drive it, right? And if you can't see it, then you don't know where it's going. So we put a little camera in there to try driving it. Matter of fact, one of the things that Grant and I did, why we got this idea is, I had a little RC car, speed car, racer, and Grant got one of these early little micro cameras that could transmit onto a regular TV.
Okay.
And so when we were at the archives at the ranch, at Skywalker Ranch, we would take and put the camera on my RC car, and we would drive it around watching the monitor. And it was amazing how fast we can go, and we could go into places that we didn't go, because you're actually like you're sitting in the car.
Yeah.
And then we would put it on an elevator, take it and drive it downstairs, where we were upstairs and it was downstairs. So we got that idea. It's like, hey, we could put that same camera. We took his camera and stuck it in there. We never used it in the filming of it, but we had the opportunity to do it.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
This is great.
And then this is the getting R2 ready for episode 2, and we repainted all of them. So we had 8 R2 domes. We had an R5D4 dome. We had R3 R3 dome and an R4 dome. They're different shaped heads. And yeah, that's it. That's Nelson Hall, who's the other R2 operator. He was responsible for painting all the R2s. And then that's shot from the film, but the background is Lake Como in Italy. But R2 and 3PO aren't really there. That was shot on April 7th, 2001.
Okay.
And I know that because that was my birthday. And it was the last day of shooting. It's the last day we shot for episode 2. And after we wrapped that shot with Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker, it's the only time Kenny Baker is in episode 2. After we wrapped that shot, everyone sang happy birthday to me and brought out champagne and birthday cake. So
that's great. I was ready to ask if that was Grant in C-3PO, but
no, that's actually Anthony Daniels. Yeah, and Kenny Baker. Like I said, that's Kenny and it's the only time they appeared in the prequels together, actually, because Kenny was not in episode 3, although he got credit for it.
Okay.
He was not. He never made it into episode 3. So.
Got it. When I look at all these R2-D2 domes, I'm curious, how many R2s have you worked on over the years?
Well, there were the 12 that we worked on here. We built one, so that's 13. We modified I don't know, 16 or so.
16, some R2-D2. Do you have a favorite? You have like one that's like, oh, that's the R2-D2. That was my favorite.
The one we built for episode 1 was the one we called the Uber R2 because it drove the nicest. It was so precise and precision, and with Grant's programming of the remote was great. So.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah, that's again the crew. The crew on the left is the crew we did in California, and with all the R2s, and the crew on the lower right is my Australian crew from episode 2, and then the top right is in Tunisia in the Lars homestead, and that's actually the same original location that was used in the original Star Wars, and that's actually a hotel in a town called Mada in Tunisia, North Africa. So that was the crew photo, and George Lucas is in there, and Anthony Daniels, and Hayden Christensen, and Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. They're all in there somewhere, and that's how many people it took to make that scene. So.
That's a lot of people to make one scene,
yeah, it is.
Isn't it?
And to feed and to house.
Yes, that's a lot.
That's why movies cost a lot of money.
Movies do cost. Any behind-the-scene things you want to share about that day?
Well, on that day in particular, actually, the original concept with C-3PO, if you remember in episode 1, C-3PO is a skeletal. Tim did a head over there that is a replica of that, and that was operated as a puppet, and the puppet was operated the puppeteer was behind the puppet. It's a Japanese style of puppeteering called bunraku, and the puppet is attached to them in front, and when they move, the puppet moves. And then they digitally removed the puppeteer in episode 1. Well, in episode 2, you were going to first meet C-3PO in that same form. And so we shot all these scenes, including in Tunisia, with the puppet. And Anthony Daniels was operating the puppet, and he fell in that day that we shot that scene, and he fell with it. He fell over, which is terrifying because you're strapped to this thing. There's no way he could do it.
Right.
And he just fell. He got tripped on something and fell over, and broke the puppet. And so we had to quickly come up with how we're going to do this. The legs were all broken.
Yeah.
So I asked George, I says, can you shoot C-3PO just from the waist up? And he says, yeah. I said, so I just cut off the legs of the puppet, and he just, it was just a floating torso at that point. So. And again, but they cut the shot from the film, and they ended up replacing it with actually Grant in the suit for that was shot much later.
Okay. Was that a hard conversation to have? Like, hey, just shoot it from here up? Or was
No, he understood. I mean, he's like, yeah, we got to do something, Okay. We didn't have time to fix it properly. So.
Right. Had a schedule to keep.
Yeah.
A lot of mouths to
other
feed.
directors might have said, no, fix it, but George is like, yeah, we'll fix it later. Don't worry about it, yeah.
Fix it in post.
Yeah, George was great working that way. And it's episode 3. Again, my crew is pretty much the same except for one guy. The guy actually in the white T-shirt, for those hardcore Star Wars aficionados, that's Plo Koon. That's who played Plo Koon. But his name is Matt Sloan, and now he's an Academy Award-nominated visual effects supervisor. So he moved on from making robots and puppets. And now the picture on the right is the very first day of shooting episode 3. For a scene, yet again, that got cut out of them running around the Federation battleships, or whatever ship that was at the beginning.
So you worked really closely with George in a lot of these shots. Any kind of behind-the-scene things you want to say about that?
It was nerve-wracking, and particularly
staring at you while you're running
particularly on this day, because there was this whole big thing about when I showed up in Sydney, Australia to shoot. The producer sees me, says, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He says, "We're going to do R2 all digital now." And I'm like, "You're kidding, right?" And I didn't know if he was kidding or not. And I'm like, "I just came to Australia,
right?
And am I going to go back now? Are you sending me back?"
Yeah.
And then it turned out he was joking. But then I'm doing this. I'm doing this as the very first day of shooting. And they're all kind of staring at me, and I'm thinking, if I screw up right now, they're going to go, "You know what? Let's just do it all digital." And,
George is right. None of the R2s ever work, right? So yeah, that's nerve-wracking. That's crazy.
Yeah, just more behind-the-scenes stuff. We were joking at that bottom one where George is saluting off to the left. I think he's giving Anthony Daniels his eye line, but this is the last time you see C-3PO before you see him again in episode 4.
Gotcha.
So it was really cool to be on this set because it was a recreation of that original Star Wars, which the blockade runner. And then the picture up in the upper right corner, that's the R2's last day of shooting. And the funny thing about that one was every film has a still photographer with them as a unit, what they call a unit photographer, and takes all the behind-the-scenes photos and sometimes pictures you see that are in movies, in the posters and stuff like that. Anyway, that guy was the same guy that did Back to the Future, so he had some great stories about Back to the Future.
Yeah.
But Ewan McGregor and all the actors, I just want to say up front, were wonderful to work with. Every one of them were great, and Ewan in particular was a lot of fun to be around. But for some reason, he associated the photographer on set, who was hired by the company, by the production company, to be almost like a paparazzi. And so he just
trying to hide himself.
He just didn't want anybody taking photographs.
Okay.
It was this kind of like weird relationship he and the photographer had. And so I walked up to the photographer because it was R2's last day, and I said, "Hey, do you mind taking a photograph of everybody together? It's our last day." And the guy said, "I'd be happy to." He says, "But Ewan will never agree to it." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'll just ask him." So I went up to Ewan and I said, "Hey, Ewan, it's Archie's last day. Do you mind getting a photograph?" He says, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So that's the photograph we took. So
the photographer's like, "Man, I just need to ask Don for all these pictures." You got it too. Right.
My family was there. My son, that's my son. That's my son and my daughter. He's 26 now and she's 20, so...
the little dated pictures?
Yeah, they're a little dated. They look the same, actually. A little taller. That R2 that my son is in is actually in the Academy Museum in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So,
Any fun stories about your kids being on set?
The funniest one was where my son, being 4 years old or 6 years old or whatever he was I think on episode 2 he was 4 years old.
Right.
Kids want to talk, they're just a bundle of energy. And we had to teach him that when you go on the set, you have to be quiet. And they have a system where when they're going to shoot sound, they ring a bell and they put a light on. And then when they cut, they ring 2 bells and they put a light on. So if you hear the bell ring, you can't talk, right? So we tried to drum that into his head. And so he'd come on the set to watch the shooting, and because he knew he wanted to say something, he wanted to comment on it, he would just hold his mouth like that, so that he would. So there's pictures of him on set like this. So making sure he didn't talk.
Good kid. Wouldn't you like the young man up here in the very front? Would you like to be in an R2D2 like that? Wouldn't that be fun?
It's a little tight.
It'll be a little tight. Ask Doug in the very back. He's got an R2D2. See if he can sit in it. He's looking. He's like, yeah, that sounds good. What's the image in the very top up here?
Oh, so these were actually for a magazine called Vanity Fair, and Annie Leibovitz is a famous photographer. She shot that iconic shot of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. It happened to be on the day John Lennon died. And she did a whole series of photos for Lucasfilm for the prequels, for episode 1, episode 2, and episode 3. And on episode 3, they decided, which was a little different, they decided to focus on the behind-the-scenes people for Vanity Fair spread. So they went to each department and shot each department, and that's the one on the left. Well, both of those are the droid department. So, and my son happened to be there that day. He wasn't meant to be. He happened to be there, and she asked, "Can he be in the picture with you?" So I said, "Yeah," and it was one of the coolest father-son things we ever did. And it's great because they used it, and then beneath it there's a quote by George saying it's a story of fathers and sons, you know. So I thought, hey, okay, cool, I fit in the Star Wars universe somehow. So.
That's fantastic. Who are these folks?
Yeah. So again, this is a dated photo, but this was one of the coolest things about being an original R2 builder and myself, and getting into the films and doing it for the real thing for the films, and then being able to almost see it full circle go around. And the R2 builders now are building things far more better, far more sophisticated, far more greater than anything we made in the movie. We pulled things on a string and held it together with bubble gum and gaffer's tape, you know. I did tell George Lucas, you know what gaffer's tape is? It's it's like duct tape, right?
Yeah.
And I told George Lucas, my one story, George Lucas, that the Force is like gaffer's tape. It's got a light side, a dark side, and it binds the galaxy together. And he just looked at me and went, and it walked away.
What's awesome.
So anyway, the R2 builders now have like, because of being able to be present at the conventions, they attracted the attention of Lucasfilm, years ago, and have been an integral part of all the Star Wars conventions now. And now they've been asked to actually provide robots and costumes and props and everything.
Yeah, I know Oliver's here. He's got robots in the movie. Mike McMasters was just
McMaster,
droid that's on
Senate
Mandalorian. So
yeah, Mike Senate. But yeah,
and then there's you.
Oh yeah, it's me. Yeah. So now they're the ones doing the R2s for the films and the TV shows. So I think it's really cool, that full circle.
It's fantastic. This has been fantastic. Everybody, give Don Bies a big round of applause. Come on.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to move into a Q&A, question and answer with Don. Do we have a microphone? There's a guy right here with a microphone. Put your hand, we have one in the back as well. Throw your hand up if you have a question about movies. We got a guy down here in the front. Cool. Questions for Don.
So when R2D2 did the entire, like, across the movie set, was that pull string or was that all CG? Like when he did his the whole scream, when he did his wailing across the movie set and ran into the wall.
In which film? The Return of the Jedi?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that was real. I mean, they didn't have computer graphics back then. So it's a series of cuts.
Yeah.
And I think they pulled it. There's a cable that they use for stuntmen when they get shot with a shotgun. They call it a jerk cable.
Okay.
And they put a harness on, and it's got either a pneumatic ram or a bunch of guys on the other side of the wall that yank them and they go flying backwards. I think that's how they did that R2. So they just jerked him back for that shot.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Additional questions? Questions for Don? Here.
Hi, can you talk about your work on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and also what did you do in Pirates of the Caribbean? Just wondering.
On The Last Crusade, I did guy Donovan that drinks from the wrong grail when he shrivels up and falls. Yeah, so what we did is we created 3 different heads that were from 3 different stages and replaced them, and then the computer graphics morphed between them. I am Indiana Jones in that movie. So when they go to the book burning and he encounters Hitler and he signs the diary, they needed an insert of the hand signing Adolf Hitler. I'm Indiana Jones. So I'm Harrison Ford's body double.
Well, the hand double at least.
No, that was the body behind.
Okay.
That was Hitler that was signing this.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
For Pirates of the Caribbean, I built, I say built. All these require team efforts, so I don't want to take credit for anyone else's work, but I led the team that built the pirate ships, the miniature pirate ships. So we built, for the first one, we built 3 pirate ships, one of them which we blew up. I don't think I worked on the second one much, but on the third one, we built a couple more ones, and yet another one we blew up. So those are always fun to blow. But that was actually, when you talk about a highlight, Pirates of the Caribbean was the highlight of my career too, is being able, I had just come off work on the Star Wars films, and I did work on the sequels for the Matrix films as well. And doing all this science fiction-y stuff that's not really based on any kind of reality, and then actually learning how to build a boat. They brought in a shipwright and taught us how to build boats, and having this 1,000-year-old art that we were being taught was really cool. So, and we built them like real boats.
Good question. Yeah. Additional questions. Questions for Don? Don, we're almost to the end of this. It's 3:56. We just got a few more minutes left. Anybody want to hit Don with one additional question before we call it quits? Oh, we got a question back in the very back. This happens to be my son-in-law. I just want to throw that out there, okay? All right.
This better be good.
What was your favorite Star Wars film to work on?
Favorite film?
Yep.
Attack of the Clones, and not because it's good. I don't know if it's good. I don't have any sense of whether these things are good, but because of what we got to do. I spent 2.5 months in Sydney, Australia, a week and a half in Italy, a week and a half in Tunisia, 3 weeks in London. So it was a lot of fun to just travel around and do all that stuff. So, and we meeting working with the actors and everything was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. That was a decent question.
It was okay question.
It was okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Expect more. Well, hey everybody, this was fantastic. I hope you had a good time. Let's give a big round of applause for Don.
Thank you.
Good job, Don. Thank you so much.
And aren't these things these guys are doing?
Oh, yeah, let's give a big shout out to our droid builders down here,
They
guys.
deserve a round of applause.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody. Enjoy COSI Science Fest. We've got a couple more hours left. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We did it.